Hey everybody, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be tackling a big one, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a classic for a reason, right?
Oh yeah, definitely a classic.
But we're not just going to skim the surface here. We're going deep. And hopefully you can walk away from this with some real insights you can apply to your own financial goals, whatever those may be.
I think what's really interesting about this book is how it really kind of shakes up those traditional ideas we have about financial success. That whole idea of go to school, get a good job,
Yeah.
and then you'll be set for life. Kiyosaki really challenges that.
Yeah, he really throws that out the window right from the start with that whole comparison
Yeah.
between his own dad, who he calls Poor Dad,
Right.
who is highly educated but struggles financially,
Yeah.
and then his friend's dad, the rich dad,
Yeah.
who is a self-made entrepreneur.
It's a really interesting way to frame the whole book.
It is.
And it really gets you thinking about whose advice are you actually following? Are you listening to the people who told you to just play it safe? Or are you looking for ways to really make your money work for you?
Yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit, because one of the first big ideas Kiyosaki throws out is that financial education is absolutely key. It's not just about knowing how to, balance your checkbook. It's about really understanding how money works in the world.
He's really critical of traditional education, too. He argues that schools just don't teach these practical skills that people need to really navigate the world of finance, investing, managing their own cash flow.
Yeah, it's like we're all trained to be good employees, but not necessarily entrepreneurs or investors,
Yeah.
which is what he's really advocating for. But I'm curious, from your perspective, for someone who's already pretty good with the basics of personal finance, what's that next level of financial education look like? Where do you go deeper?
I think Kiyosaki would probably say, start digging into specific asset classes. He loves real estate, but he also talks about stocks, bonds, even businesses themselves as assets. It's about really understanding the risks and rewards associated with each, so you can make those informed decisions.
It's not just about saving money. It's knowing how to actually put that money to work in different ways. And that kind of brings us to what I think is the absolute heart of the book, that difference between assets and liabilities.
This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little controversial too.
Okay.
Because he's not using those standard accounting definitions. He's talking about anything that puts money in your pocket versus anything that takes money out.
So a rental property that generates income is an asset. And a fancy car with a huge loan payment is a liability.
Yeah.
Even if you technically own it.
Exactly. It's a total mindset shift. Every time you're thinking about buying something, he wants you to ask, is this helping me build wealth? Or is this just another expense that's draining my resources? He even talks about your home as potentially being a liability if you're constantly pouring money into it.
Whoa. That's a bold statement.
Yeah.
It's definitely making me think twice about some of my own purchases for sure. But isn't there a danger in oversimplifying things?
There's always room for nuance. A house can appreciate in value and become part of a good long-term strategy. But his point is to get you to really think critically about every purchase and how it fits into your big picture financial goals.
So it's not about, living like a monk or anything. It's about making conscious choices that align with what you want to achieve. I think this whole mindset shift kind of leads us to another big theme in the book, which is that entrepreneurial spirit.
Absolutely. Kiyosaki believes that true financial freedom comes from creating your own income streams. Rather than just relying on a job, he wants you to look for opportunities to build businesses, side hustles, investments that generate that passive income.
He's not afraid to tell people to take risks.
He definitely encourages people to get out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
But it's not just about blindly jumping into anything. It's about taking calculated risks and making strategic decisions, which is why he emphasizes that financial education piece, so you can actually make those informed choices.
You got to be informed.
Yeah.
But you got to be willing to seize those opportunities when they come up. I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. Finding that balance between planning carefully, but also being open to new possibilities.
It's really about mindset. And Kiyosaki believes that your beliefs about money can either limit you or they can empower you.
It's like he's saying you need to cultivate that rich dad mindset, that belief that you can create wealth, that you can achieve financial success. But how do you actually do that? How do you cultivate that kind of thinking?
He talks about surrounding yourself with people who already have that mindset, mentors, advisors, friends who are financially savvy. He also talks about the importance of constantly learning, expanding your financial knowledge.
It's not just about reading one book and being done.
Yeah.
It's like ongoing Constant education.
And being willing to challenge your own limiting beliefs.
So it's about building that foundation of knowledge,
Yeah.
cultivating that rich dad mindset, and then putting it into action.
Which brings up a big question. How do we actually apply all this to our own lives?
Yeah, that's what I want to get into next. We've talked about the philosophy. Now let's talk about the tactics. What are some steps we can take to start building that financial freedom? What can we actually do starting today?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
It is.
And I think that's where Rich Dad, Poor Dad can be both inspiring and maybe a little frustrating.
Okay.
He paints this big picture of financial freedom, but sometimes the details on how to actually get there can feel a little bit vague.
It's like he gives you the blueprint for a mansion, but then he makes you figure out the plumbing yourself. So where do you even begin? What are some practical things people can actually do?
One thing Kiyosaki is really big on is this idea of paying yourself first. And it's not just about saving whatever's left over at the end of the month. It's about treating your savings and investments like a non-negotiable expense.
So like before you pay your bills, before
Right.
you buy groceries, you're setting aside a portion of your income.
Exactly. Automate it if you can. Have a certain percentage of your paycheck go directly into a savings account or an investment account. Make it a habit, just like paying your rent or your mortgage.
But makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what about someone who's, living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by? How can they possibly pay themselves first when they're struggling to just cover the essentials?
Yeah, that's a tough situation to be in, for sure. And that's where sometimes Kiyosaki's advice can feel a little out of touch with reality. But even in those circumstances, he'd argue that there are ways to create some breathing room in your finances.
Like finding ways to increase your income? He
Exactly.
talks a lot about building multiple streams of income.
That's one of his big principles he wants people to think about. Side hustles, freelance work, maybe even starting their own business. The idea is to diversify your income, so you're not relying on just one single job.
But that could be easier said than done, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Starting a business, even a side hustle. It takes time. It takes energy. Sometimes it even takes some upfront investment. And not everyone has the resources or the risk tolerance for that.
True. But I think Kiyosaki's point is that there are always opportunities out there. If you're willing to look for them, maybe it's selling stuff online. Maybe it's offering a service you're good at. The key is to get creative.
Yeah, and be persistent too.
Oh, absolutely.
Building a successful side hustle or a business is not going to happen overnight.
It takes work. And it takes that rich dad mindset, believing in yourself,
Yeah.
and being willing to keep going, even when it gets tough.
So we've got pay yourself first. We've got build multiple income streams. What are some other key takeaways from Rich Dad, Poor Dad that people could actually implement in their lives?
You know, one that people often overlook is the importance of constantly learning, always expanding your knowledge about finance. Kiyosaki is a big reader, and he encourages his readers to be the same way.
Yeah, he's all about reading books, going to seminars,
Yeah.
networking with other people who are financially savvy.
Exactly. Investing in your financial education is one of the best investments you can make.
I love that.
And it doesn't have to be expensive. There are tons of free resources online, podcasts, articles, videos, you name it.
Podcasts like this one.
Exactly.
So it's about being proactive, taking charge of your financial education. Don't wait for someone to give you the answers. Go out and find them yourself.
And don't be afraid to question things. One of the things I really appreciate about this book is that Kiyosaki, he really challenges conventional wisdom. He wants you to think for yourself.
Like his stance on homeownership. Pretty controversial.
Yeah,
Suggesting that a house isn't always an asset.
it definitely goes against what a lot of people believe,
For sure.
but it makes you stop and think. Question your own assumptions about money and wealth.
So even if you don't agree with everything he says, Rich Dad, Poor Dad can be a really powerful tool for sparking some critical thinking, getting you to question the status quo.
Absolutely.
It's about thinking differently about money and how you can achieve financial freedom.
That's where the book's real legacy lies, I think. It's not just a step-by-step guide to getting rich. It's a call to action, a reminder that you have the power to create your own financial destiny.
It's about taking control, building those assets, generating income that works for you, not the other way around.
Exactly, but it's important to acknowledge
Yeah.
that this book isn't without its critics.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the main criticisms that people have of the book?
Well, one common critique is that those anecdotes about Rich Dad can be a little vague,
Sure.
not a lot of concrete evidence to back them up.
Yeah, I gotta say, some of those stories do feel almost too perfect. Like they're designed to illustrate a point, more than being totally factual accounts.
And while that can be frustrating for people who are looking for, you
Yeah.
know, hard data, I think it's
Hmm.
important to remember that. The core message about financial literacy and wealth building, it still holds true.
It's kind of like a parable.
Yeah.
Maybe the specific details are embellished,
Yeah.
but the underlying lessons are still valuable.
Another criticism is that sometimes Kiyosaki oversimplifies some really complex financial concepts.
Yeah.
He makes it sound like getting rich is easy and quick,
Right.
which we all know is rarely the case.
It definitely has that enthusiastic, almost evangelical tone at times,
Mm.
which can be inspiring, but can also be a little misleading. Building wealth takes time. It takes work. And yeah, it does involve some risk. It's not always as glamorous or simple as he sometimes makes it seem.
So it's important to take his advice with a grain of salt. Do your own research
Hmm.
before making any major decisions.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key. Don't just blindly follow anyone's advice, even if they seem like a financial guru. Do your homework. Seek out different perspectives.
Yeah.
And make informed decisions based on your own individual circumstances.
I couldn't agree more. Another criticism you sometimes hear is that Rich Dad, Poor Dad promotes a kind of materialistic view of success.
Right.
It's all about wealth accumulation.
Yeah, there's definitely that focus on how much money you have as the measure of success. And some people argue that. That leads to a pretty narrow definition
Yeah.
of what really matters in life.
And money can become the be-all, end-all, which can be a dangerous trap to fall into.
Yeah.
It's about finding a balance, using money as a tool to create a life you love,
Yeah.
not letting it become the only thing you focus on.
Totally agree. So even though Rich Dad, Poor Dad
Mm.
has its flaws and even some controversial aspects, it's definitely sparked some important conversations about financial literacy and challenged the way people think about money.
Yeah.
It's a book that gets people thinking, it gets people talking,
Yeah.
and hopefully gets people taking action to improve their financial lives.
It's been a cultural phenomenon for decades, and there's a reason for that. It taps into that desire for financial freedom and security, and it offers a roadmap, even if it's not a perfect one, for how to achieve those goals.
And even if you don't agree with every single thing Kiyosaki says, it can still be a really valuable starting point
Yeah,
for your own financial education journey.
I think so.
It's about asking questions,
Mhm.
exploring different perspectives, and ultimately figuring out what financial success means to you.
That's what it's all about.
So with all that said,
Yeah.
where do we go from here? We've talked about the big ideas, we've talked about the criticisms, but what about the actual implementation? How do we take all this information and turn it into real-world results? That's the big question, right? It's one thing to talk about all this stuff, but how do we actually make it happen?
Yeah, you can read all the books in the world, but if you don't take action, it's not going to do you much good.
So for someone who's listening to this and feeling a little overwhelmed, like, where do they even begin?
I think Kiyosaki would probably say start with your expenses. Really track where your money is going. You might be surprised by how much you're spending on things that aren't really that important to you.
Yeah. It's so easy to fall into those bad habits. Subscriptions, those little impulse buys.
They add up.
They do.
Once you have a clear picture of your spending, you can start making more intentional choices about where to cut back.
Not about depriving yourself, just being smarter about where your money's going.
Right. And then once you free up some cash flow, you can start directing it towards your goals.
And investing doesn't have to be complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't need a ton of money to get started.
There are so many resources out there
Mm.
to help people learn the basics of investing.
Yeah, so find what works for you.
Exactly.
Maybe it's setting up an automatic savings plan. Maybe it's opening an investment account. Maybe it's just reading a book about a specific investment strategy that sounds interesting.
The important thing is to just take that first step.
However small.
Yeah. Find something that you're actually excited about.
Because investing shouldn't feel like a chore.
Nope. It should be an empowering experience.
Exactly. And I think that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad really boils down to. It's about taking control of your finances and creating a life of abundance and freedom.
It's about shifting your mindset from scarcity to abundance
Yeah. Believing in your own ability to build wealth.
and achieving those financial dreams.
And recognizing that financial freedom is more than just money. It's about having the resources and the flexibility to live a life that truly aligns with your values.
It could be traveling the world, spending more time with your family, pursuing a creative passion, or just having that peace of mind that comes with knowing you're financially secure.
Well, we've come to the end of our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
It's been a great conversation.
It really has. We've covered so much ground. From Kiyosaki's core principles to the criticisms of his work and the impact it's had on the world of personal finance.
It's amazing how relevant this book still is, even after all these years.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show you that financial literacy is a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely.
So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing yourselves to achieve your financial goals.
You got this.
And maybe one day you'll be the rich dad, inspiring others to take control of their financial futures.
I love it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, happy investing.